On this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast.
The second actor, he did about 45% of the film, and he's doing a good job, and I was optimistic. But about 45% of the way in, he had a crisis. He says, look, I got to be honest, I really don't believe in this thing that I'm doing, and I feel like you really do, and I don't want to do a disservice to you.
Wow.
And he essentially quit halfway through, and that was half my money.
How do you survive losing your lead actor halfway through a production in a difficult location with half your production budget spent, and it's your money, and it's your debut film? This is what Douglas James Vail and his screenwriter Reed Lackey are here to tell us about on their production of 40, The Temptation of Christ, which released last week. This was only the beginning of the challenges they would face. One of the most important lessons to learn from these men of faith is that when crises arise that threaten the production itself, we can let our challenges make us bitter and give up, or we can face the setbacks as God's opportunities and move forward with grace, grit, and hard work. Doug and Reed are as passionate about their film as the lessons God taught them in the trenches running a challenging production. This is episode 31 and part 2 of my interview with Doug and Reed.
It's always fun to talk about how you approach things from an artistic side, and all that stuff is valuable. But I'm also thinking about what is good information to share with filmmakers that are coming out, you know, who want to make a movie that glorifies Christ or brings the awareness of God forward.
Right.
So when it comes to the production, it's not a brag story. I mean, it's definitely like the opposite of that. I mean, it's kind of like we start out, we do crowdfunding. And I know, like, just a couple weeks ago, you had Dallas on the show, and Dallas is phenomenal. You know, he's the director of Chosen, and he's had a lot of success with crowdfunding. That's great, and I'm happy for him. I will tell you honestly, it's rare, and it's a beautiful thing that it did happen for him. But a lot of crowdfunding doesn't go well. And that's the reality for a lot of other people. And I'll just tell you out the gate, we did a crowdfunding campaign. We put together a really nice video. We put together a nice presentation. We were asking for, you know, a certain amount of money to make the film, and we only captured maybe 1% of what we were asking, and it didn't work out. And that's okay. That's not like me whining or anything. This is where the opportunity is, and this is where I want the filmmakers to listen. When these things happen, these are not setbacks, and I'm not trying to be cliche, but sometimes these answers, you know, that you want are not the answers God wants you to find. You know what I mean? Sometimes what you think, what your journey is supposed to be, God has a different plan for you. And God has a plan for Dallas right now, and he knows that. And he's doing good with that. And he deserves it. And I'm happy for him. He's such a great filmmaker. I know he's had these up and down moments, and I'm just so happy to see that God's using him to make something like The Chosen. In my case, I think God used me to show, the grit, how to persevere when things are not going the way you think it would. We couldn't get any money up front. So how do you make a movie without money? Well, many years before I started doing the film, I had been saving money, so I ended up putting all my own money in it. And if you talk to most people, they'll say, never put your own money in the show. Never do that. Right. Don't put your money in the show. Well, it all depends on what your purpose is. Show, entertainment, okay. But if you're doing something that's personal, it's a personal journey. This is like your thesis on your love letter for Christ, something like that. It's personal, right? So I put my money in the show, and I put it up, and I had to use it responsibly and judiciously and wherever I could to get the best outcome. So it came down to choosing a great camera that does very well in low light. Why? Because not every day can you have somebody there running lights. Not every day can you have the production light scenario that you want. Sometimes you're on your own. That was my case. Many days I shot just me and the actors. It was that intimate. It was almost like we were doing a painting. You know, it really felt like that. We were just going out into the wilderness, like a National Geographic documentary with people who were dressed the part in the period, and we were performing, and it was just me and the actors just dancing in the sun. I mean, that's what it was, but there was structure. It's not that abstract. You have to have a plan. And we went to these wonderful locations, but not every day did we have the luxury of a staff, of people around me helping, supporting. No. It wasn't like that at all. It was about being intelligent with the use of lighting, using duct tape to hang things when you could.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Microphones. It's not pretty. And a lot of people, I think, like to talk about how great the production process can be. Well, you know what, guys, it's 2020. And if you're just starting out, it's not always pretty. And that's okay. That's okay. That's real talk. Because we do have that technology now. You know, we do have these lightweight LED devices. You can purchase them at a Walmart. You can go in the camping section and find them. I mean, the lighting options are vast. There's many different options. There's light panels, and then you have little camping trinkets. You can be creative. If you have a low light camera, you can do a lot. And so that's what we did. I hooked everybody up on lavalier microphones, and I worked with the lights that I could when I was on my own. I brought the actors on those locations, and I made it happen. In our case, we had an actor who was casted to play Jesus. He wasn't really doing the work. He's a wonderful person, but he wasn't taking it as seriously as I was. And I knew in my heart he wasn't the right fit. So that was the first Jesus that we had casted, and it didn't work out for him. I had to move on with someone else more committed. The second actor, he did about 45% of the film. And he's doing a good job, and I was optimistic. But about 45% of the way in, he had a crisis. And that crisis was that he knew, and this is what he tells me. He says, look, I got to be honest, I really don't believe in this thing that I'm doing. And I feel like you really do. And I don't want to do a disservice to you. So I just don't think I'm ready. I don't think I'm the right person.
Wow.
And he essentially quit halfway through. And that was half my money. Right?
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean? Like the location wasn't exactly around the block, Todd. I mean, you're packing through the night, you leave at 2 a.m, you pick up your actor at 5 in LA, and you travel 5 more hours just to get to the desert. You get there at 7, 8, 9 a.m. after you've been driving for 5 or 6 hours. That's when your day starts.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like going
insane.
to the moon.
I mean, in a normal production, that's when the insurance kicks in and you get lawyers involved, and it becomes a very ugly mess.
It can be. Depends on who you work with. Depends on how you structure it. Right.
Yep.
But in the end, you make it as nice as you can. Now, I'm not suggesting like how I did it is how everyone should do it, but everybody, and you can ask them because they will tell you, everyone who worked on this film got a really great experience out of it. They felt taken care of by me. I gave them everything that I had, and I tried to make them feel important and part of the process because they were so pivotal. That's why Reed doesn't like that I say so many wonderful things about him, but he doesn't understand how important and necessary he was for me to facilitate my love letter.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I can't do that without him, like this thing does not work without these other people.
That's right. It's an art form that is a community art form.
It's a community art form. Yeah. Now, the scary part, if you're on the director side, is, you know what? You got to know a thing or two about social media. I guess it's lucky that I did. I had 5, 6, 7 years as a marketing professional in corporate America. So I knew a thing or two about marketing. I knew how to build a website. You got to know that. You got to know how to create some content on social media. If you're really lucky, you might be able to be proficient in Adobe Creative Suite. That's probably a good thing to know. No Photoshop, no Adobe Premiere, no After Effects. If you're not an Adobe person, find a substitute for such things, but create content. Funding is a challenge. Contracts are long. Location permits, you got to get them. Unions, non-unions, depends on how you structure it. But you got equipment that you're carrying, organization, audio, lighting. Casting's really important, but you know what's more important? Knowing how to get the best out of your actor the day that they're shooting. That's a talent. Because sometimes the performance doesn't line up the way you think.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not going to get exactly what you want. So here's how you handle a situation like that. You look at the person for who they are. You see who they're trying to be. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you got to know them a little bit before the film started so that you have some personal rapport. That's important. And if you have a personal rapport, sometimes you can touch on a personal subject, something they disclosed, something that they're willing to talk about with you. Sometimes you can go back there. And I'm not talking about manipulation and pulling heartstrings. I'm talking about people, actors who are willing to share a little bit of who they are so that when the time comes, you can remind them of that conversation. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then they will give you their authentic self, which is everything. It's all about authenticity. Mm-hmm. It's not about, man, go louder, go stronger, say it like this. Man, stop doing that. Stop telling people how to act. Yeah. Okay, if you don't know out the gate that person is a real person, that they know who they are, that's your job in casting. You know, you want somebody who's real, somebody who's comfortable in their own skin. If you can count on that, you'll be okay out there, because you just want somebody real on camera at the end of the day. That's what you want.
50% of your job is casting.
It is, absolutely. So in our case, I'm kind of dancing around, but when it came to our third Jesus, after we had shot half the movie.
That's incredible. I don't know how you survived that, but that's amazing.
Barely. I mean, we're talking like ramen noodles, right? I mean, we're talking like just a year ago, traveling around the country, like having steak dinners, getting paid a handsome salary in corporate America, and then leaving all of that to eat ramen noodles and go in the desert and hope someone doesn't quit on you. That's not me saying, hey, feel sorry for me. That's me saying your faith is more strong than you know it is, but you got to use it. You got to put it into action. You know, that's like the big thing is like, let faith lead the way. Okay. Like when things get leveled at you, level up. You hear what I'm saying? Like level up when things happen like that. It's a gift. When it all shakes out, it's a gift. I mean, to come out the other end and be like, man, my relationship with God is so visceral and real. You know, I mean, sometimes that's not always necessary, but like it feels good. As a Christian filmmaker, you know, make this part of your worship. Make it part of your prayerful time, you know, as you're going through the journey. So when we got to the third actor, what I told Reed was the first actor I found was a close personal friend of mine. He trusted me. He knew I was a little bit wild as a filmmaker, but he was going to hang out with me. So I knew he was going to be a good, safe option for me. But he really just didn't, his heart wasn't in it. So that was a problem. The second guy looked really good. Like, you know, if you photograph him or something, you know, he should be in like some of these like paintings. Like he really looks like a classic Jesus, like in paintings, you know, it was like on the money, but his voice wasn't very strong. And when I found Cheyenne, it was his voice. And it became clear to me at that moment that like all this time I'm trying to cast Jesus, I'm looking visually at, oh, does he look the part? Does he move the part? Does he act the part? Then I realized, you know what, the star of the movie is not that actor. It's the word. It's the word, because of the way we did the film. Reed wrote the film so that everything Christ says is lines directly taken out of Scripture. And we had, it just like it hit me like so late in the game that I was going about it all wrong. And so when I was able to choose this actor, yes, don't get me wrong, he looks like a good visual Jesus. It was his voice, though, that really was like inspiring, because he had this ability to kind of work the sounds. He was a voiceover actor. He never did anything like this before. He's a voiceover actor. Huh. So how cool is that, right? Like
that's pretty cool.
He knew how to take the language and give it personality. And by doing that, just listening to him recite Scripture, to me, the movie is, I don't know if it falls into the category of entertainment piece. If you want to hear Scripture read to you, pop in the movie. Yes, there's some visuals. Yes, it's interesting. Yes, there's nice moments. But I think the big takeaway of the film is, man, you get to like listen to the word delivered by a seasoned actor who really knows how to use his instrument and his voice. And I realized, man, the word is the star of the film. Okay, that's a long rant. Reed, do you want to dive in, or Todd, do you have a question? That was a lot.
No, that's great. Go for it, Reed.
I echo so much of what Doug said, I will say before I allow you to ask if there's anything specific you want, is I really like the way Doug frames it. Is that so? I think the film is entertaining, but I do think that it is more an exploration, a meditation on the subject at hand, and there was no possible way to know when we started this journey 3 years ago that it would be released in a time of so much enforced isolation, which is just stunning to think about. And here is a film about Christ who followed the Spirit out into the wilderness in a sense of isolation and what he encountered while he was there. And I really do think that it is a meditative piece. It's meditative in tone. It's meditative in pacing. That's not to say that it's boring. I don't ever find it boring. But when Doug talks about it not necessarily being an entertainment piece, it is not designed to be this thrilling shock fest. Instead, it is designed to provoke thought, to provoke feeling. It is designed from script to screen. It is designed to meditate on these particular subjects, and hopefully, my sincere prayer for the film is that it will resonate on a spiritual level with people. That's not to say that I feel like the film is intended to be particularly sermonizing, but I love the way Doug characterized it as a love letter. I think it was crafted in love. I certainly crafted the script that way. I know Doug made the film that way, and that's what we hope echoes through in the finished product when people watch it that way.
Yeah, you can't sell that. I mean, it has to communicate through the screen. And honestly, it's been personally very satisfying to go through the journey, to not quit, to bring that, new set of actors in, to finish it. By the time we were finished, I mean, it was July. We started in January, 3 months in, we get through halfway through the film. By the way, it wasn't structured like a traditional movie where it's like all compacted on a shot list day after day after day till you shoot the whole thing out. We kind of spread it out. I mean, it was a little bit bizarre, but that's how I had to spend the money too. So it was part of my process. I wasn't able to just kind of dump all the money in right away. I mean, in some cases, I had to do some jobs on the side and earn extra cash to keep pumping into it. So it was like an ongoing transfer of work, and I was doing marketing consultant on the side, and then I would get a chunk of money and be like, okay, let's go back out. I mean, it wasn't that unorganized, but in many ways, the actors kind of knew what the conditions were, and they were fine with those conditions, and they were ready to go. The people were committed. That's fortunate. That's all good fortune. Is that the norm? Could anyone endorse that idea? No. But that's what happened for us, which means that a group of strangers, not Reed and I, but the cast, a group of strangers who didn't know each other before we started the process, got cemented into the process and believed in it and stuck with it. So you could say a lot of blessings. You could say, man, he's just lucky. But I think people were really committed, and they liked what they saw. And I showed them the dailies, and I kept people involved so that they could see what they were working on, that it wasn't a waste of anyone's time. So it did come together very much like a slow painting, It took 6 months. By July, we left. Our final shooting day was July 7th, I think it was. And it was 110 degrees out there, Todd. 110 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you ever filmed in 110 degrees. It's it's bananas. You step outside and your energy just drops to zero.
Yeah.
Zero. I mean, we're putting ice cloths around our neck. I mean, the conditions were wild, but we ended up doing it, and we were all very happy that in the end, everyone also felt like they accomplished something, They learned something on it, and
well, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the testimony of you guys is that you decided to make an independent film on your own terms, and you did everything on your own, and you learned that filmmaking is a war with battle after battle and defeat and problems. And it's not just Christian filmmakers, although most Christian filmmakers who I've talked to, they have these horrible war stories about difficulty and challenges. even the Kendrick brothers, who seem to be, one of the bigger successes, they all have these huge setbacks and difficulties on set.
Right.
Yeah.
And, as you were talking, I'm reminded about Malik's first film, Badlands. I mean, he struggled with that for years, trying to go out and work and make money and then come back and shoot stuff. And then he did that all on his own. And I recently interviewed Gary Bettinson, who is a lecturer at Lancaster University, and he's sort of a specialist on Hong Kong cinema and Asian cinema in general. But Wong Kar-wai, one of my favorite directors, they have a completely different way of shooting than they do in Hollywood. And a lot of these Asian directors come over to Hollywood to shoot Hollywood films, and they leave because they can't stand it anymore, because the way Hollywood is structured is so foreign to what they're used to doing in their own things. And it's funny because I also remember Lucas often saying that his least favorite part of production was the actual shoot. He liked pre-production and post-production, but forget the shoot. That's just the biggest pain in the butt that there is. And, for me as a director, I'm like, hey, I want to get out there and shoot. That's sort of my goal is to do that. But I think you guys have are doing something that I've been looking for in Christian film, and that is, I think we need something like a French New Wave in Christian filmmaking.
That's exactly it.
Rejecting everything that is presented to us from Hollywood, and we're doing things our own way, building our own cinema, and changing it through that.
I want to add a couple of things, because I know that we've been on the call for about 45 minutes, and I think Reed said he might have to get off soon. So I want to give a couple of tokens of information that I think is not so much about the artistic process, but just practical advice. What I would say is, if you're starting out, look at your resources around you. That could be your home, it could be your friend's home, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a community that you have. Look at the resources you have and try to look at them objectively, not like in the way that you usually look at them. Like maybe you go to church regularly, or maybe you are on a practice field or something, wherever there's a large building or venue of some kind that you're typically involved in. And try to imagine that no one's ever seen that before, and no one really knows about the world that you're in, that your world might be interesting, like these things that you might take for granted in your regular flow could actually be interested if presented well. Now, that's not to say that everyone's life is super interesting. The reality is it's not. I mean, I as much as I feel personally satisfied that I've been delivered through this film, that I feel like I had a very strong prayerful walk with Christ and I'm personally satisfied, I also know that my story is probably not that unique compared to a lot of filmmakers out there. It is a challenge. Okay. So the thing is, we're not, and I want to be careful how I say this, but not everything we do is super special or super unique. But what you want to do is you want to decide on something that you can put together, but also really care about it too. Find your why, because when all these adversities kind of hit, it's easy to quit. So if your why is really strong, your why will kind of pull you through that. You have to have a good reason for why you're doing it. Yeah. And anyway, if you get through the process of the casting and you assemble a couple of friends or people that you can hire, maybe you're a union level. I mean, I'm not trying to say do everything Sandlot grassroots, but if you have everything struck, I'm doing a picture soon, and that's going to be fully union, and we're going to have a legitimate production and a couple of actors that people know. That's where I am now. I got invited into the next level, but the first level was very grassroots. And so if that's where you're at, you want to get through the process and just be very thoughtful and intentional about what you're trying to achieve in the scene. Sometimes things are written out on a script, but try to understand the subtext, understand what's really being conveyed, and make every moment count. The other thing I would say is, if you are a Christian filmmaker, don't forget that when the camera is off, it is as important for you to conduct yourself as a good person, as a good representative of Christ, when the camera's off, just as much as it is on. A lot of people want to point to the film they made, but they've upset and made a lot of people feel bad because maybe their creative ideas weren't as strong as yours. You might hurt a lot of feelings along the way. Try to be patient with that process. Be more compassionate. You don't have to concede, if you have strong ideas, but welcome people's ideas and don't make them feel welcome. I made that mistake. I'm sharing this from experience. Like, I made that mistake of being a little bit strong. No, I don't want to do that. And after a while, people go, I don't really like what it feels like to offer an idea, because Doug doesn't always, respond well to it. And it makes me feel like my idea is inferior. This is stuff I had to learn from people who shared that with me. So I'm not like special. I have flaws. I'm riddled with flaws, but it's really important to know that, like, it's be an ambassador of Christ off camera. It's probably even more important than what you do on camera, like what you're filming. So it's all act well and be responsible to the contracts and pay people what you promise you'll pay them, and do the right thing. And people will typically, at the end of it, even if it's not the highest pay, they will be happy that they worked with you, because at least you are a man of your word. You told them what you would do and you followed through on that. And if you can surprise them every now and again, try that. Try to do something like that. Like when people are really pouring in, love them back. Like those are things that are important. Now, the other thing I want to add is this, and beyond conducting yourself well and delivering a project using your resources locally, the real world works essentially like this. You create a product, okay, and there are people around the world who represent territories, and they purchase products and they distribute them. And that's how goods and services and all that stuff is transacted. And the epicenter of transactions happen at trade shows, a lot of trade shows. That's where, like, new businesses, entrepreneurs, when they have a product or they have a new company, they get a booth and they go to a trade show, and then there are buyers and sellers walking up and down, and you have to be willing to put your card out in front and say, this is who you are, and don't be afraid to talk to people. Oh my gosh, how many filmmakers are just too afraid to say something, like, you don't want to be arrogant, but don't be afraid. Like, if you have a movie, it's okay to introduce yourself and talk about the film you have and not be afraid. And you'd be surprised, especially in the faith-based world, a lot of these who's, I'm talking like really cool filmmakers who are doing cool stuff, like Carrie Solomon, who did Unplanned. Carrie Solomon, who was a stranger to me a year ago, met me at NRB and gave me the time of day, and even looked at my film and gave me feedback. This is Carrie Solomon, director of Unplanned. There's a cool community here. Now, they're not all going to give you the time of day. It's true. But if you're willing, I met John Irwin through this process. John and I spoke many times. Andy Irwin, I know Hank Irwin, their dad. It's cool, man. Like, they're doing great stuff, and they're encouraging you. They're saying, man, you keep at it too. There's a beautiful world that's kind of developing right now that I like to call Hollywood. Hollywood, man, it's this other group. It's us, Christian filmmakers, trying to raise Christ up and make motion picture happen. So when you make a movie, okay, don't think, I'm going to make a movie, go to a festival, and it's all going to work out for me. Right. Sometimes you got to get the movie into a film market. Go to a film market, get a sales company to represent you, or pay to represent yourself and have your own booth. But go to the markets where the buyers are. That's where opportunity comes. You may have success putting your video or your movie online through an aggregator into, VOD platforms. You may have success in that arena. It's a long tail process. You'll make money, take a while, or you can get buyers who will pay you right up front for your film, but they don't know about your movie unless you're at those places. Right. The other thing too is know how to craft an email. Write a good email. If you're not a great writer, get somebody who can write a good email. You don't want to come off, I don't know how to say it, but like come off confident but not cocky, but construct a strong email and explain what you're asking from them, and also show them your assets, and don't hide that from them. Like if you're trying to reach out, I got all the way to Affirm Films, man. Like, I spoke to the president of Affirm on my movie. Sony didn't want to carry 40, but he took me seriously, and he watched my film. So I'm a nobody, Todd. But but you have to construct yourself the way the business world constructs themselves. It's how you represent, have your assets prepared, maybe have them use Vimeo. Vimeo's great if you have a pro account, get password protected. It's very inexpensive. There's a couple other third-party options that will secure, encrypt your movie so it doesn't get pirated. Sometimes throw a watermark on there. I know I'm dumping a lot, but like this is the nuts and bolts. Like once your movie is done, you have to think about all the assets that are needed. There are websites that talk about all the assets, like your poster, the key art, the imagery. There's basically a turnkey marketing kit that distributors expect when they buy your film. So you want to get your assets ready, and you want to know how to write a strong email, and you don't have to look at the film industry to know best practices. Just look or talk to people who are in sales, who are doing well in sales, and ask, how do you start a conversation via email? What are some of your ideas on getting leads? I have been able to cold call and cold email. They say, we don't read unsolicited stuff. You know what? That's kind of true. It's really what they're saying is we're probably not going to look at it because most of it is riffraff. But if your stuff is good, okay, it will get through. They will look at it. And I've had all the top people in this industry reach out to me and legitimately respond and say, I'm interested, I'd like to see more, or, you know what, we like it, that title's not for us right now, we appreciate that. Right. But a lot of them will take the time. If you have, and this is the hard thing, if you have a marketable product, something that can sell, that is presented well, looks professional, which is all the subjective stuff right there. Like, what's professional? What markets? What sells? Yeah, I know that's a challenge. Like choosing a good subject is hard. But if you have good creative intuition, the nuts and bolts of it is don't be afraid to write an email. Don't be afraid to stick your hand out and shake someone's hand, look people in the eye, tell them what you're about. Have something on your person, a one sheet, a little bit about your film. That's practical advice. The best thing I could have done is built a legitimate website, because people who don't know you will judge you very quickly on your website. And if they think that you look good in your presentation, you kind of pass like the first sniff test, So this is like really what happened for us. And next thing you know, bloggers and journalists online grabbed our information about our film and put it into these like top 10 most anticipated Christian films. We didn't ask for any of that. It just happened. And because of that, our little YouTube trailer, went to 400 and almost 50,000 views now. No marketing money behind that. No YouTube dollars spent. It's just organic. It's organic traffic, but we have 500,000 views roughly right now.
That's incredible.
But it's all the building blocks is what I'm saying, Todd. You have to you have to have it all kind of set up, and I could probably write a book about it, but it's about presentation. It's about how to present, how to communicate, how to organize your thoughts, how to be prepared to give them a sales sheet when somebody's interested. Don't expect the world to think you're special is an important reality check. But then know in your heart you are special because what you did was special, and then operate accordingly. Right. And it's okay to be rejected. Keep on trucking. The last thing I want to say is no amount of money for your production, as exciting as it can be, is worth it if the people who are holding that money, influence the narrative, are taking you off your path to glorify God. If that's what your intention is, do the low budget stuff. If you get the money, if you're surrounded by good people and you can do that at that level, like Dallas, which is beautiful, God will deliver you there. Just be faithful. And if you can't get any distributors and you're looking for everybody to take your movie and sell it and make money for you, just understand that e-commerce is a real thing. Social media marketing is a real thing. And I know plenty of people who are currently making movies and they're putting them online and they're selling them transactional on their website, and they're not making a tremendous killing, but they're making their money back, in some cases making a little extra. It's an ongoing revenue stream. And if that's it right now, don't let your ego crush your purpose, because the ego will tell you, man, this isn't working out. Well, I'm not saying don't work hard and don't want to be as big as you can be, but don't let the ego stop you from why you got up in the first place to do this. That's why your why has to be strong. That's it.
That's great stuff, Doug. I appreciate that. That's a really good boost in a small dose for Christian filmmakers.
I had just kind of 4 quick pieces of advice that I'd give. Mine is focused more on story approach and story structure as opposed to the overall production. Doug had some great nuggets of wisdom to determine story structure itself, or the production itself. But in terms of story structure, I know that a lot of talk gets made about like making a Christian film, and they're usually discussed as having been written rather poorly or written badly, or those kind of things come about. What I would suggest, the first thing that I would suggest is pick one rule that you decide not to break and be willing to break literally all the rest of them in terms of structure, in terms of approach, in terms of anything. So for me, for writing it, the one rule for this project was every word out of the mouth of Jesus had to be scripture. That was the one rule. So
That's
I said,
cool.
okay, I'm not going to anything that Jesus says has to come either from the Old Testament that he can be quoting, or it has to be something that he later said later in his ministry, so we know he would have said it. And so then that provided an anchor around which I could take all the rest of the characters and play with them in ways that remained true to Scripture, because it kept coming back to it. It kept coming back. Everything that Jesus said had to be based in Scripture. So again, the advice being, pick one rule that you will not break as a determination, and then be willing to break all the rest of them. Be willing to break them, bend them, see where your creativity takes you to. And that's my next point. My second piece of advice would be to stay curious about your story. A lot of times, particularly approaching a biblical narrative, but even approaching a narrative of just people in a small southern town, can be a lot of conversations about, do this or do that, or that character wouldn't do this, or that character would do that. Stay curious about what they would do, and be willing to ask questions, and be willing to sit inside the story and ask, what if they did this? And how would it look if they did this instead of this? And how would that change the story? And how would that change the dynamic of an individual scene? And that brings me to my third piece of advice, which is make every scene intentional. A lot of times when that you kind of go through the motions of things, you can say, this piece is meant to just establish the mood. Well, it can do that, but if all it's doing is establishing the mood, then it's an unnecessary scene. Every scene has to have a character that is pursuing something, or a character with something to lose. And every scene should be structured around that end. Even if it is a character sitting in silence with no dialogue, there still needs to be something that they're after and something that they stand to lose. That's a comment that Doug had made very early on when we were developing this story. He asked me, he said, what does Christ stand to lose by his time in the wilderness? And it helped so much with the scenes and with selecting what choices would be made at which time. It's always make sure the character has something that they're after and something that they stand to lose. And my last piece of advice is just sort of broadly generalized, particularly speaking to people who desire to get into the Christian film world and they would want to just take the world by storm. I'm gonna be very deliberate with my language here. I'm going to encourage people to de-spiritualize the project and instead seek to spiritualize the process. And so what I mean by that is don't act as if the project you're working on is going to save humanity. Instead, make sure that you yourself are approaching it to so many of Doug's points, that you're approaching it in a manner in which you yourself are maintaining spiritual health and well-being.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great.
When the project itself is over-spiritualized, well, then everything has to serve the project, and that's where you start getting into where you're not being collaborative, you're not being creative. The process itself begins to be stymied because you've over-spiritualized the importance of the project. Instead, make both the internal processes, your own creativity, and the external processes, the practical ways you go about the production, spiritualize that. Pray for people.
Yes.
Pray for the processes. Make sure that
the ministry's in the process, Reed.
Absolutely.
It's in the process. That's where the church is in the process of the film. Go ahead. Sorry, but you're so right. Thank you for
that's
saying
absolutely right. Yeah, of course. And so just to encourage people out there, like, your project may or may not be the be-all, end-all to everything, but you can be sure that at the end of it, you can look back and say, I was faithful through this process. I was made sure, and I was attentive to my daily well-being and the well-being of the people with which I was collaborating, and with kindness and curiosity and seeking above all to do all things as unto the Lord. That is so much more helpful, because then ultimately you can look back and say, well, the project is what it is, and people will respond to it how they want to it, but I am super proud of the way that we navigated it, because I feel like we did so in accordance with how the Lord would want us to act and behave. So those are my little nuggets of advice that I just wanted to share before we sign off this time. We may talk about more after you've seen it, but I just wanted to share all that.
That's great. I appreciate that. That's some really good advice, guys. And I hope our filmmakers take that to heart, because I've seen that on sets and talking to other filmmakers and what they've experienced. But Reed and Doug, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us your journey, and such a heartfelt story that is connected deeply to both of you, it seems like. Yeah. And, I hope we can do this again. And we're going to do what we can to get people out to see 40. Thanks you
so much, Todd. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. One last thing I want to say for you, Todd, with the podcast. This idea that you brought into the world, the podcast, to facilitate a communication between filmmakers. You are a filmmaker. You have some years on us. We're young. You're giving us a platform to speak. You're very gracious. You know a lot. You know a lot more probably than even we do about the process, but you're still very humble in this process, and you give that opportunity for us to speak. It's not forgotten, or it's not unseen by me or Reed. We think it's really cool that a person who's been doing this for as long as you have would even open up that door to have this kind of open dialogue. It says a lot about you, and I think it's benefiting those people out there. And I think there's something to be learned here, not only just by us, but look at Todd as an example, somebody who has done this before, who is still keeping his mind open to fresh and new ideas and welcoming the conversation. I think that's cool. So thank you, Todd, for being
Thank
that
you.
person.
I appreciate that. I always consider myself a learner, especially in animation, since I'm surrounded by so many creative people. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can all the time, and I'll be learning until the day I die. So, it's nice to be around creative people, because we all bring something to the table, no matter what our experience or age or whatever. And it's great talking with you guys. You're encouraging and inspiring.
Cool.
Thanks so
cool.
much.
Thank you.
To find out where you can watch 40, The Temptation of Christ, go to their production homepage at faithworkspictures.org. Thank you for joining me on the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. You'll find show notes and more information about us at ministryofmotionpictures.org.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.